Thank you very much. Let's hear it for PJ and Roy Hirabayashi, the founders of San Jose Taiko and a number of other things, including San Jose State's Ethnic Studies Department, and they are just always involved in so many community things, and we're just so happy that you're here, and so appropriate that you're starting off this ceremony. But good morning, everybody. I'm Robert Handa, and I am one of the MCs for this event today, and we want to thank all of you for being here and making it here on time with all the wardrobe changes that probably had to take place this morning as we all looked out the window and suddenly realized it was raining. Somehow I get the feeling that Paul Sakamoto would be very flattered by this event and also quite amused that it's not quite turning out like we had all planned. I think that he probably would have said something like, "It's good, it keeps out the riffraff." And it probably is true. For everybody who is here, you are definitely not letting something like this stop you from paying tribute to a man that we all admired so much. And this is such an appropriate setting for this celebration of life. Heinleinville Park in San Jose, San Jose's newest public park. This space honors the legacy of some of the oldest settlers of San Jose, and I really like that word, settlers, because the Asian immigrants and their descendants who refused to be driven out were pioneers for all of us. And this park demonstrates a space of courage and compassion like that exhibited by John Heinlein when he leased 5 acres of land for a new Chinatown after the Market Street Chinatown was destroyed by arson. Anybody that needs more details can talk to Connie Young-Yu. She'll tell you all about it. The new Chinatown gave rise to the development of Japantown and Hanoi Town, and Paul's family actually operated a boarding house right over here at 5th and Jackson, and he later returned to operate an extension of Sakamoto Plants, where the boarding house was. Now we want to give you a couple of quick logistics to think about. First of all, be sure and write a message on one of the remembrance cards that they're giving out in the back and drop it off either at the card box table or give it to Nina. who was walking around. There she is. And go ahead and get in there. She'll be walking around with the basket. They'll get thrown. You don't have to put money in it, just the remembrance. And they will also go to the card box table in the back if you want. And if you need a plausible excuse to leave while I'm talking, the bathrooms are right over here. Just follow the yellow sign, okay? Now, I am really a lucky person because just by being born where I was and when I was, I had a chance to be influenced by a lot of heroes and mentors. And I am very pleased to announce or introduce the two co-MCs for this event. Both of them have both been heroes and mentors of mine for many years. The first person I've known ever since I was a very young man, so maybe what, 6 years or so? Okay, maybe more like 60. But he was actually at Sunnyvale High School when I went to Sunnyvale High, and he was a couple years older than me. And I have to tell you that having had a lot of apprehension into coming into high school, and you have all the usual insecurities, but also too is a diverse high school, but it had a very established Chicano student union, and it had a very established black student union, but there was no organization for Asians at that time. And so when I came into the school, I didn't really know what to expect, and boy was I pleased to find out that the quarterback of the football team was this big, strong Asian guy. It really, you can't imagine just how much of an influence that was for me in terms of how my attitude changed toward things. And then to watch him evolve into an activist and influence me in that area as well. Our lives intertwined quite a bit. And I think people like Paul Sakamoto and his influence on Paul and his influence on me was a big reason why we always end up somewhere together like today. So first of all, let me introduce the first co-MC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Fong.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah, I was a couple of years older than Robert, and I was very lucky to have met Robert because in his lifetime he advised me on how to deal with the media, and as a politician that's really important. And so thank you very much for all that great work and advice that you gave me. Welcome to the Celebration of Life for Paul Sakamoto. I was honored to be asked to be the chair of this committee. It was in title only, because there's outstanding committee members who helped organize the celebration. Vickie Taketa, Connie Young Yu, Yvonne Kwan, Steve Nakano, Vanessa Hatakeyama, Craig Sakamoto, a nephew and family member, Ben Horiuchi, an old friend, PJ and Roy Hirabayashi, icons here in J-Town, with the founding of Celebrate Taiko. Paul Sakamoto was my first role model and mentor, my freshman year at Sunnyvale High School. And Paul Sakamoto was the principal at Sunnyvale High School. We had some racial issues on campus due to the civil rights movement, and Paul Sakamoto was our principal of Sunnyvale High School. He called for a meeting among student leaders from each class and from the different racial groups. There, Paul Sakamoto introduced me to the concept of the multicultural democracy. The different groups met and aired out their differences and have continued to pursue those goals and objectives that Paul Sakamoto introduced me to in 1968. And so I am a follower of Paul. He's my first role model and mentor, and I just love the guy. That's why we did this. All of us love him, and we respect him, and that's why we're doing this. And so I have a further speech about mentorship, how he mentored all the Asian American leaders in Silicon Valley and Santa Clara County. He mentored me, he mentored almost all the Asian American leaders, and this legacy will continue, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Thank you very much.
Actually, Paul reminded me of something when I was, before I entered Sunnyvale High School, I was at a student orientation for students that were going to go to Sunnyvale, and Paul Sakamoto was there, and even though he left later, he was the one running it, and I just remember like being kind of a little bit surprised to see that the principal of the school was going to be this Asian American, Japanese American, and I didn't really know what to think of it really, because you know the principal's such an authority figure. And I remember that some guys were kind of joking around, and I was joking around with them, and Paul walked over and whispered to me, "Don't embarrass us." And I'm sitting there going, well, what does he mean by that, you know? Don't embarrass us. And so that was actually in my mind the first thought of the idea that there was sort of this collective community and that Asians and Japanese Americans thought of each other that way. And then later on, there was another little kind of a thing like that, and he leaned over to me and he says, "Don't embarrass us." And I just thought, and it kind of struck me, and I thought, oh my goodness. But I have to say that I was a little bit apprehensive, thinking I'm going to be going to this high school where this kind of stern disciplinarian Japanese American authority figure will be there, and what will it be like for me? Luckily later, I met Mike Handa there. And so that was quite a bit of a change for me there, and a nice contrast. But I will say that Paul Sakamoto had a very wry smile when he would say things, and so he always took the edge off of it. But I always remember thinking that when he said "us" instead of something else, you know, and I remember thinking that was very significant. My next co-MC is Mike Handa, and it is interesting having a hero that is also everybody else's hero. If anybody can relate to Paul Sakamoto, it is this man. He has been such an outstanding example, and also reminiscent of what Paul did. As an educator, as a community leader, as a horticulturist. Oh, well, am I kind of reaching the mic? Yeah, okay, I know. He actually runs a farm or ranch in Oregon now. And he made his way here to be with us today. And by the way, what do you grow there, Mike? It's legal, right? Anyway, he made a long journey here to be with us and to pay tribute to Paul. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mike Handa.
Directions, don't embarrass us. And I'm not a disciplinarian. Well, welcome, and it's really great to see all of you here. This is the confluence of all the things that happened, basically, with Paul's lives. And a lot of us had looked at each other. I didn't know that he knew about you. We're going to be here this morning, and we're going to be saying things like, I didn't know that, or I wish I knew that. And now it's the opportunity to latch onto each other and exchange experiences that we've had. And so that we get a full gestalt of Sakamoto. And for me, it has been a real trip. And so it's an honor to be up here with Paul and Robert. Robert was one of my first students when I first taught at Sunnyvale High School. And I looked at him, and the first week I just knew that he had destroyed the stereotype of a model Asian student. Him and his buddy. And then Paul Fong. I've never seen a young man so big. He leaned against the wall at the cafeteria with his arms crossed in his cloth jacket. I tried to get him to join the Asian student union that we were starting. He said, no, I can't now. I gotta remain neutral, you know. The blacks and the Chicanos, you know, they're my buds, and I gotta stay right in the middle. Besides them, QB. And I thought, okay, you know, this guy could have been a contender in a lot of areas, especially football. He was one of the few guys I knew that could toss a football over 60 yards. 60 yards, not touching it, bro. 60 yards when you catch it. So, you know, if you think about football, that's an arm. And he's about the same size now as he was in high school. So I was trying to get him to be my bodyguard, but I said, no, I gotta be really neutral. So we want to be able to celebrate Paul in all the aspects that we understand him to be, and we're going to learn more about from each other. And so, and the rain, I think Robert said something about the rain, and it was Paul's bringing down the rain on us. But I think that we really knew Paul, we knew about his love of plants and things like that. That rain is just another step in the cycle of life. And so it's fitting that it is raining, because it does bring all of us together under one tent. And I think that that's probably one of the goals of this life, is to make people come together under one tent and pursue life together. So thank you for this opportunity.
You did not embarrass us, Mike. Thank you. Actually, it is sort of a very interesting thing. I mean, I don't know how planned it was. It just sort of came together that the three co-MCs here, we all have such a history together. And you mentioned the QB. I was going to De Anza College, and I was the captain of an intramural football team. And so I recruited Paul to be my quarterback of my team, which I think the other teams really thought that was an unfair thing to do. I remember the very first game, they were kicking off to us, and somebody said, should we let Paul run the ball back? I go, no, make Paul block. And it was like the Red Sea, running through the Red Sea with Paul in front, so it was great. And having that Sunnyvale High connection, you know, one of the great things too is being able to acknowledge people as heroes and mentors and things like that. I do a quick thing. He might be talking during the remembrance. He doesn't know I'm going to do this, but when I was in high school, one of the big role models I had in terms of just not only as an athlete, but also the way he carried himself. He was one of the outstanding basketball players at Sunnyvale High, went on to star in collegiate basketball. And he's here today, and I just want to give a shout out, because I would never get another chance to do this. Joining us is Dave Blasquez. Dave, stand up and take a bow real quick, would you? He doesn't know I was going to do this, but he was a longtime friend, and Paul Sakamoto was his mentor. We talked before about this event, so I was really glad to see that he made it. Because I think that there were so many people influenced by Paul that it's so great to see them come forward. We're going to start some of the first of our series of remembrance sections in this program, and the person who's going to start us off here is somebody that I keep running into at a lot of different events, so many different events, but one of the ones that I always kind of think about, and it would be so significant for Paul and everybody else, is that we go to a lot of events like the film festivals, where the emphasis is to make sure that people never forget, never forget what happened in terms of internment. Don't let that become this little footnote in history. It's got to become something that is actively talked about, and unfortunately always still becomes a contemporary issue. There's just so many groups of people that kind of face the situation that Japanese Americans faced, and it's really a great thing to have that as a history lesson. And also, one of the things that she and I just enjoy so much about these events is that it really focuses on the real life Japanese Americans, the real people that were affected by this. It's so easy to kind of focus on the statistics, 120,000 Japanese Americans, things like that. Every single one of them was this individual, and their families were totally affected by what happened. And it is important for us not to ever forget, and to remember to preserve that part of the history so that we all keep learning from it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the organizers of today's event, my good friend, Vickie Taketa.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Robert. Lilia Hernandez Chung, a retired Foothill College professor, writes in her book, The Rush of the River, to the reader she writes, "Some truths are best expressed in a fable. Some circumstances demand explanation and give birth to stories." During an oral interview, Paul remembered vividly a memory from his childhood, scenes of his mother and he out walking. His mother, with a half potato, had hashtag marks sliced on the top. When she found a plant that she wanted to grow in her garden, she snipped a piece, placed it in the potato to return home to plant and nurture in her garden. Today, collectively with our voices as our instrument, we pen through storytelling a fictionalized book about Paul Sakamoto. Now, as we begin to turn the page, share our stories, we will have gifted one another Paul Sakamoto as he lived his life and find ourselves reflected in the stories told. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce a family member, Craig Sakamoto, his nephew, who's a retired educator. And so Craig has served on our committee, and he did a great job, and he's shared stories about Paul in the family setting. And so, Craig Sakamoto, please.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome you to the celebration of life of my Uncle Paul. The youngest of 11 children, survived by his sister Bertha. As you have read on the board, he was born not too far away from here, 5th and Jackson in the boarding house. He spent most of his childhood here, only interrupted by the internment in Jerome, Arkansas. Most of the family were shipped back there, and then he and most of the Sakamoto family came back to San Jose to establish themselves. One of his brothers, Jim, had a barbershop just across the street, and the family name still is on the window there. It's really amazing. Hope it stays there. He himself ended up in Campbell, among the many scattered fruit and nut orchards that were prevalent in the valley at that time. He went to school at Campbell High School, and then went on to San Jose State to earn his master's and his bachelor's and master's degree. Then he started teaching. At Sunnyvale High School, and after a couple years, one of my memories of him is that I don't know if he was curious or crazy, but he loaded my sister, myself, my cousins, 2 or 3 other cousins, and drove us up Highway 17 to Santa's Village. We really had a good time, but now that I look back upon it, I can visualize Paul, young Paul in his early 20s, trying to herd 4 or 5 little ankle biters running around Santa's Village. I think, look upon that, I think that kind of reaffirms his decision to stay in secondary education as opposed to primary education. He continued teaching at Sunnyvale High School in that district, and worked his way up through the administration. Through many years, he decided to get into move his way up in that district, or at least move his way up in education. He traveled back to Michigan State and earned his doctorate. The family is very proud of the fact that he did this. He came back to San Jose and got a job at San Jose State, being one of the deans there. Then he got hired back in his original district of Mountain View Los Altos School District as assistant superintendent and superintendent. His influence on me was one of the impacted my decision to get into secondary education at an early age, as he did from the stories you've heard. His influence, his mentoring, I think you'll find through many of the stories and beyond that, how those threads kind of intertwine and influence so many of us. And I appreciate you all coming out for this event. Thank you so much.
Introduce a person that is very close to Paul. He's his godson and his trustee of his estate. He provided for all the pictures and everything, and he has a shrine at his house of Paul Sakamoto's work. Sakamoto plants, his sign is there, and all the plants that when he closed down his nursery, he moved it over to Mark Stepovich's house. And so Mark Stepovich is his godson and the trustee to his estate.
Welcome. Yeah, my name's Mark Stepovich, Paul's godson, and similar to Craig, Paul's been in my family ever since I was born, and he's Uncle Paul to us too. Everybody in my family knows him as Uncle Paul. And I was completely unaware of Paul's other families, meaning the education family. We didn't talk a lot about his career. And so it's been amazing to meet people and learn so much more about the influence that Paul had on lots of other areas of life. Like I said, I know the influence he had on my family. Started out as a young kid being my Uncle Paul from day one. My dad and Paul became fast friends at Campbell High, and continued on to San Jose State, where Paul was the first admitted Asian into the DU fraternity, and that was a really big deal. He didn't get let into the fraternity until his senior year, and that meant a tremendous amount to Paul. And as I mentioned, Paul was pretty much a member of our family. My grandmother off of Sobey Road in Saratoga had kind of a hub where all the San Jose State people would hang out, and Paul was right in there. He was a member of that family, very close to my grandmother. Matter of fact, he flew up and surprised her in Fairbanks, Alaska, where she spent summers, all on his own. Huge event. No, he did a great job. But anyhow, I just wanted to kind of fill people in because I didn't know anything about the education family. I figured a lot of people here don't know anything about his other family. For me, it was always exciting on birthdays and Christmas time because Paul always had the most exquisite, interesting gifts. I remember as a young kid, he gave me part of his butterfly collection, and next thing you know, I'm collecting butterflies. Then he gave me this unbelievable portions of his shell collection, all unbelievable specimens. Next thing you know, I want to scuba dive and collect shells and do all these things, all these little influences. And Paul also introduced me to, the word he always used was good taste. He wanted to do everything really well, and he would comment about other people and say, he or she has good taste. And that was very important to him, and he didn't compromise that. Most of you who knew him then remember too also he loved these Jag E-Type cars. He had the coolest car. Matter of fact, my Uncle Jerry wrecked one of them. He said, hey Paul, can I try your car off of Sobey Road? I said, sure, go take a drive. Well, Jerry never came back. Neither did the car. Well, nobody died or anything. But anyhow, and so I kind of thought of him and, as kind of the Japanese James Bond. He just had that look. We got some great photos of him next to the Jag E-Type, all impeccably dressed. And there's even a magazine article in the Mercury News from somewhere in the 60s where he was voted most eligible bachelor. So I'm sure that's easy Google information if somebody wanted to find it. Some of the things that he contributed to, which again I was completely unaware of. I knew about my family, I knew about the nursery, I knew about his art, but it's so much deeper than that. And the level of influence that he had to so many people, like when I met Paul Fong at this meet and greet meeting, when people reached out to me and said, hey, we'd really like to do something for Paul, Paul Fong stood up and said, I'll do anything for that man. So guess what? He got to be chairman. I kind of came up with this simple thing came to my head. I said, you know, Paul's a quiet giant. He very quietly, meticulously influenced people without pushing or shoving. And I think that's such a good way to do things. He motivated people to be better. He motivated me to be better because I wanted to be like Paul. He never asked me to be. It just was very important to me. And I figured, you know, look at all these remembrances here and all these people coming out in the rain, all to honor this man. That's no accident. That's some great work. And then I wanted to add a brief story, because I don't have super time here, but I thought it was interesting because we talked about Paul's wit and his sense of humor. As Paul got older with his Parkinson's, he became very unstable, and he was prone to falling and this and that, but he never gave up. Like, Ben would take him to lunch and stuff, and he just went for it. He would push as hard as he can. You know, it took him forever. He would slowly make his way, do these things, and he probably, the ones that I knew of, he probably fell 50 times, and he never got hurt. So I would ask him, and he came up with this little monologue, and he told it to many people. And he would be sitting there in his walker, and I'd ask him about it, and he'd say, wow, when I think I'm gonna fall, I look for a soft spot, and I jump into it. He goes, that's how you do it. Anyway, I'm gonna end with that, and we'll continue on. Thank you.
Are there any things that you didn't know before? That's why you call it, I didn't know that. So Mark, thanks for being the son that got some that I always thought that he should have, but I never knew. And now that I know, both he and the family are blessed, and I think we're blessed with the service that you shared with us too. So talking about leadership and being assertive and quiet, but making things happen. Our next presenter is a person that took AACI from one level of service to a multi-million-dollar nonprofit service to the diaspora, the Asian American, the Asian diaspora, the newcomers, the immigrants of this valley. And she is so quiet and unassuming, but when she leaves, she suddenly knew that there was an impact. And she's a board member of a lot of nonprofits, and I'd just like to have you welcome and bring forward Michele with one L, Lew. Michele, come on.
Well, good morning, everyone. I first want to thank the organizers for having an Asian height appropriate microphone. Sorry, Paul Fong, but sometimes we have to have a chance. For many of you, you know that Paul Sakamoto was one of the 12 co-founders of AACI, Asian Americans for Community Involvement, an organization that is now celebrating its 50th year of service. I wanted to share with you today how Paul has left a legacy for generations of Asian American activists here in Silicon Valley. You've heard a little bit about him already as an educator and community leader. Paul was truly a role model who mentored so many of us in the Asian American community, starting with folks like Congressman Mike Handa and former Assembly Member Paul Fong. And mentoring these guys was probably a full-time job, so we have to tip our hat. I think what Paul embraced in all of us was the responsibility of paying it forward, mentoring others, and making sure that we maintained and drove a vision for the community. Paul always maintained a vision for the community that extended far beyond his goals and ambition for himself. He built and cultivated long-term friendships and relationships, as evidenced by the full house under this one tent today. And he was also not afraid to speak out about injustices and speak truth to power, values that carry on in AACI today. One of the things that I loved about Paul was just that ideal balance that he had of strength and humility, plus a little bit of creativity and that wry smile that people have talked about. Even in his later years, while he struggled with Parkinson's, Paul generously took time to meet with those of us in the newer generations. I look out and I see leaders like Barry Tao, Helen Tao's son, who's here in the room today, and Margaret Abe Koga, our next county supervisor. Paul always made time for us, and I'm forever grateful that he shared his talents with us and that he has also recorded some of his most memorable experiences in an oral history project that will live on for legacies. In closing, on behalf of all of us who have come through AACI, Connie Young-Yu, Mike Handa, Paul Fong, Margaret Abe-Koga, Barry Chow, myself, so many of us, we're all so fortunate that we had a chance to work with Paul. May his memory be a blessing.
The next person I would like to introduce was Paul's water boy for 8 years at his nursery at Sakamoto Plants. And you know, I used to be the water boy for my nursery too for 12 years, YK Fong Nursery Incorporated. And so I understand what the water boy does. He keeps the plants alive. And so without further ado, Kurt Armstrong.
Good morning. The gardens brought generations, friends, and cultures together. Paul knew this and brought everybody into the nursery to have this wonderful experience. Some of the funny stories that I remember is we would go and rescue plants, kind of like the SPCA gourd plants. But these weren't just small petunias. These were more like gigantic 5,000-pound trees. And we would throw them in the back of his Mazda B2000, drive it home, back to the nursery, nurse them back to health. So one of the things that Paul taught me was like one of the first experiences when planting a plant. I want you to show you the technique. So when you are planting your next plant, step one, take the plant out of the can. Step two, lay it on the table, very gently. Step three, take a billy club or a baseball bat, beat the dickens out of the roof. Step four, put the plant in the new pot, some nice dirt, and now that he said the plant has a new lease on life. Taking it to the extreme, but so whatever you think to do with the plant, this is what Paul always taught me, do exactly the opposite. You think you will have to be gingerly with them? No, you don't. They actually like it. You're right. So some of the other things that Paul liked to do at the nursery was doing a hot dog barbecue. This also served to bring communities, friends, family together. Beautiful time for us to share some junk food and reminisce about times that just we knew. He'd always reset the clock the next day by having cottage cheese with pineapple. So some of the things that we also some quotes maybe, that God didn't make plants that didn't go together. He would always say, you know, when planting a tree, never plant it straight. Especially a pine tree, always plant it sideways. It sounds funny to me, but when you drive around Japantown and you look at the pine trees, they're always kind of going like in an S. That now makes sense to me, and doesn't make sense to any of my customers. So one of the other funny stories that we had, we used to have these large pots with water, lily pads, and the frogs would come every year, and so many frogs that it started to be a problem. So we would have the kindergarten classes come down, collect the frogs, watch the life cycle of the frog. It was a beautiful thing. Then the police had to get involved. There's too many frogs in the neighborhood. One lady had a ticket louder than barking dogs. Oh gosh, no. So now we had to kind of go underground with our frog operation. The other funny story is like, Paul would always, he had the old way of pronouncing the plant names, and I would go through the book and kind of look. Paul, it's platycodon, not platycondom. I thought that was hilarious, but he never changed it. Another kind of funny story, wasn't funny to me, but so Paul would always find make these beautiful arrangements in the pots, put these beautiful trees and plants together. Nobody would ever think to put those plants together. Wow, that's great. So this next one that he came up with was top the cake. He came up with these exhaust pipes that he had found in the back and put them in with this tree, and now it looked like this angel. Only this angel was about 700 pounds. And immediately was bought by a lucky lady, Judy. I don't know if she's here today, but Judy put this plant in front of her house, absolutely gorgeous, and had these classic car headers sticking out, rusty, so you probably had to get a tetanus shot whenever you went over to Judy's house. Yeah, I think when you remember Paul, when planting a plant or a garden, just ask yourself, what would Paul do? And that's good.
That was quite some insight into how they deal with plants behind the scenes. I have new admiration for the plants now. They're survivors. And don't go anywhere, by the way. I have the feeling we're going to need the expertise of a water boy pretty soon here. You know, it was interesting because with our backgrounds in terms of Sendo High and the school district and everything, it is sort of easy for some of us to focus so much on Paul as a educator and in that field. And yet, you know, his horticultural background and his expertise there was a big part of who he was. And in fact, many of our conversations, I remember I did an interview with him during the drought, talking about plants that are better with, you know, without water and all that sort of stuff. And we ended up talking about it because he kind of knew my grandparents. My grandparents had a farm in San Jose, and then they lost it during internment, and they came back and they started a new farm in Campbell, where Paul grew up. And they also had a prune farm. And so we would start talking about the background, but we never really talked too much about internment as much as we talked about growing up on a farm and what a different kind of life that was. And I think that as Silicon Valley kind of grew, I think I really grew to appreciate more and more that lost agricultural aspect of our upbringing, you know, the Santa Clara Valley versus Silicon Valley. And I very much associate Paul with that. And I think that it's one of the things that I really enjoyed hearing him talk about because it's such a big part of Paul. And one of the things that Paul did was he donated a lot of the very scenic landscape to Hakone Gardens in Saratoga. And it's a place that I have emceed some events at before. And I have seen Connie Young Yu there many times. She is a well-known, nationally known historian. And we have talked about a lot of different topics, but we do end up at Hakone Gardens a lot for our conversations. Connie also was one of the first to really introduce me to the idea of what happened to the Chinatowns here and Heinleinville and all the other things. And we did stories about Heinleinville before it became a reality. And so Connie has always been not only in the forefront of making sure people understand history, but also make sure that we appreciate it and then move forward. And Heinleinville Park is a great example of that. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce my friend and historian, Connie Young Yu.
I first knew Paul at the founding of AACI, and in those days it was all about advocacy and social justice. He fought against stereotypes. He told me, it really bugs me when I walk into somebody's house, you know, as a visitor, and they say, would you check out my ficus, or my Ling Aurelius isn't doing so good, but and look at my maple tree. So he said, I'm always assumed that, you know, I'm Japanese and I know everything about gardening. So because of his indignation, I had no idea that he was a horticulturist at heart. When he retired as an educator, he opened a nursery, and I asked him, what's the name of your nursery? He answered, Sakamoto Plants. A noun and a verb. So he's always the educator, always the teacher. When he closed his nursery, he gave his plants away. He donated 45 cherry trees, the ones that bloomed so magnificently, 2 weeks ago, attracting thousands of visitors to this public park in Saratoga, Hakone. As a trustee of Hakone, I told Paul how grateful we were for his donation of plants and trees. But then he had further suggestions, further ideas. He enhanced Hakone by arranging the first public art exhibition, Japanese-inspired American ceramics, with his friend Ben Horiuchi at the Cultural Exchange Center, which is a replica tea merchant's building that is used for private events. He thus started the use of this lovely building for gallery exhibits open to all visitors. Paul was a great influencer. You know, the word influencer is now used to, influence millions of people, and we feel that he was the original. Just by suggestion, he changed the soul of Hakone. He touched the soul of our legacy. He asked me, during one of these, wonderful, fun events, he said, what happened to the gardener during World War II? I did not know, but he suggested it would be my quest to find out. And I found out that James Sasaki was incarcerated with his American-born wife and 4 children at Topaz, Utah for 3.5 years. And I learned how the garden was protected from vandalism by the private owners, the Tilden family, who brought the Sasaki family, all of them, back to Hakone with James Sasaki as a head gardener and caretaker. And the gardener flourished. This research led to an exhibit and a video titled Hakone and Executive Order 9066. And I learned that 3 of our trustees, their families, and one of them, Reiko Iwanaga, was incarcerated during World War II. And we did not know their experiences until this Paul had sent us on this quest to find out this hidden history, a shameful chapter in American history that has been denied so long. So here in this beautiful garden, a tragic chapter in American history was showcased, never to be forgotten, a history lesson for all. Paul was a man for all seasons, who changed the landscape wherever he went. He sowed the seeds of hope and renewal. Sakamoto plants. Thank you.
I never realized that was a noun and a verb. It puts new slant on that title, Sakamoto plants. Thank you. The other person that's going to be coming up had an impact that was like clockwork. They shared the love of art together, the love of teaching. Not at Sunnyvale High School, art, but he left before I got there. And so, but what I did find out is that besides being an art teacher, he was also the detention teacher for Paul Fong. And so, don't embarrass us. So, let's bring up this person. He's got some stories to tell you and some to share with you. Ben Horiuchi.
It's so great to see the various people down here and we're able to make it today. And I think it was Paul's idea to rain to see how many of them are truly his friends. Well, I first met Paul Sakamoto just quite by accident. I knew his older brother quite well, Don. It was the first time I met Paul in 1958 when I was still teaching at Cupertino High School in the art department. And Paul suggested, hey, would you like to come to Sunnyvale High School as an art teacher? And I paused a minute and I said, of course. And so that's how I first met Paul. And from there, it was just a relationship that kept growing. And then after about 7 years, I was offered a position in Japan as an art teacher. And I went to Paul and I said, do you think this is a good idea to go to Japan to teach? He says, why not? I said, that's enough endorsement for me to go. And so that was one of the 4 overseas schools over a span of 20 years. And then finally came back sort of home. And so at that time, Paul he related to me. He would go to these board meetings while he was a superintendent of that Mountain View Los Altos district. And he said those meetings often turned out to be very boring. So he would write on the margins of his notes, make small ink drawings of various plants, and that's how it first started. And to this day, he would make, it turned out to be his favorite thing to do, was to make these sketches. And I remember that Marilyn Mason, is she out there somewhere? Good. She put together a book, along with Paul, of course, of his sketches. But that was only a small portion of what he has remaining. Mark Stepovich would remember this, putting all of his sketches, hundreds of them. It must have took you, I don't know how long to take it down from all his walls around there. Plus his ceramic pieces. My goodness, he really loves ceramic. And I almost forgot to tell you, I invited him to go with my wife and I. We used to go to Japan every summer, and I knew he would enjoy Japan because of the principal art in Japan is pottery. And so he loved it, along with the plants. And he wouldn't say, that's a petunia, or that's a whatever. He would name them by the botanical names, always. I'm sure some of you would realize this too. And so, after many years of knowing Paul, eating lunch, having lunch together every Thursday, he loved that, to have his friends come by and talk to them. And a change, obviously a change from his atria food. And so that is my short story of how I he came to know Paul. And I'm sure all of you have similar stories to share, which I look forward to have you share them with me. Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. First of all, as Paul and Mike were asking me earlier about whether they could say this or that, and I told them, well, in TV, you learn that when you get the microphone, you get to say anything you want. And so we have a number of people here who are going to be introduced later, who are dignitaries and part of the program, but I always appreciate pointing out people who are here, even though they're not part of the program. First of all, Marilyn Mason, nice to see you. Hello. He said Marilyn Mason, a bunch of Segal Pi people looked up, but what? And also, Assembly Member Gail Pellerin is here. Thank you, Gail. Thank you for being here. And my colleague and good friend, you know him as the traffic anchor on NBC Bay Area. Please welcome Mike Inouye is here. You know, Mike, one thing, I don't think it's a stereotype, but it's always very interesting in these kind of circumstances that Asians just don't like to act like the weather is bothering them much. You know what I mean? You'll watch a number of Asian people under a tent with wind blowing and rain, and it's really cold, and you'd never know they were cold to look at them, you know? So thank you so much, everybody, for enduring what you're doing and enduring it for Paul. You know, one of the great things that growing up here and watching San Jose Japantown grow, watching groups like San Jose Taiko and other groups kind of, you know, build a real history here, but it is truly remarkable, and I am so proud that there is a San Jose Japanese American Museum here, because there's only 3 Japantowns left. I have a show called Asia Pacific America, and we went and visited all 3 Japantowns, and when you go to the one in LA, San Francisco, and here, you really realize that not only is there a lot of history and a lot of culture to appreciate, but also you realize kind of how fragile it all is, you know, and that it's really kept together not just by civic and governmental involvement, but also just the feeling that people have for that community. And that's what really keeps Japantowns alive. And I really think that having a Japanese American museum is really a big part of everybody being able to kind of join in on that kind of spirit. So I would like to introduce the acting museum director of JAMS, as we like to call it. Please welcome Vanessa Hatakeyama.
Thank you so much, Robert. Again, my name is Vanessa Hatakeyama, and I am the acting museum director of the Japanese American Museum of San Jose. I'm also standing on my tippy toes because even though it's Asian American height, it's still too tall for me. So it's clear from the long list of speakers and all of you who came out on a very rainy Saturday morning that Paul was so well loved and well respected, and JAMS is humbled to be a part of this program. I had the pleasure of meeting Paul only in his later years, when I was but a young barista at Roy's Station, and Paul was a regular customer. He always ordered a latte in a porcelain cup, which I would deliver to him as he read his newspaper at the table. He had a kind and quiet manner about him, and always looked up with that smile of his and said thank you. Even though I didn't know him personally very well or speak to him very often, his character was clear from his actions. Through working at the museum, I learned so much about Paul through reading his oral history that we recorded and transcribed in 2019, where he described his life as the youngest of 11, growing up in and around Japantown, his experience being evacuated and living in a U.S. government incarceration camp as a 10-year-old boy in Rower, Arkansas during World War II, and his journey to become an educator and of his family's involvement in San Jose, Japantown. I was able to experience the intersection of Paul's love of art and plants with his dedication to educational institutions through his generous donations. He often donated his original artwork to the museum store so that we could sell them to raise funds. And he also donated many of the plants and trees that we still have in and around Japantown and on the museum grounds. So even though I didn't know him very well, I feel like I knew his character and the impact that he had on the people he knew and the community that he fostered. I feel very fortunate to have been able to meet him, and I'm so grateful for all that he has done for JAMS and the JA community as well as the educational community. And for myself, I will always remember that kind smile. On behalf of the Japanese American Museum of San Jose, I offer my sincere and heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Paul Sakamoto, to all of you here today. He is loved, missed, and remembered, and at JAMS we'll always continue to hold and tell his story. Thank you very much.
Okay, you know, former San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, he's a nice guy. I like him. I have now fulfilled my equal time provision as I introduce our next speaker. Sometimes, you know, you have to be careful how you talk when you're a journalist, and you have to make sure that your heart is somewhere where somebody can't take a picture of it on a cell phone. So I want to make sure that we give a good warm welcome here, fresh from his landslide victory to go into the November primary election. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome congressional candidate and Assemblyman Evan Low.
You can always leave it to Robert, can't we? Thank you very much, Robert, and hello to each and every one of you. This is a celebration of life and an opportunity for us to reaffirm our commitment to this region. But what's also equally important is that when you talk about generations and answering the call for service, that we remember where we've come from. That when Robert talked about 3 remaining Japantowns, that we also remember the history of the 5 Chinatowns here in San Jose, and that they also were burnt down by the San Jose City Council and sanctioned to be done so. But why is this relevant to the story about a celebration of life of Paul Sakamoto, and also the importance of co-founding Asian Americans for community involvement? That it is also not just about the Japanese American community, the Chinese American community, but also our region in its entirety. The essence of what makes democracy beautiful. And that's what we must not lose our sight on. That when we remember the history of where we've come from, that we stand on the shoulders of individuals like Congressman Mike Handa. So many of us stand on his shoulders, similar to that of Paul Sakamoto. That's why Mike Handa is so short now. Because we're so heavy and so many of us have stood on his shoulders. These warriors in our community, including that of Paul Fong, who also served in the ecosystem of Asian Americans and the community involvement, which then led to the next generation of leadership and individuals like Betty Duong, like Margaret Abikoga and Ellen Kamei. And the allyship that is so important, that we must recognize where we have come from, where we are, and where we're going. That history oftentimes repeats itself. That we remember the history of service, not just at the national level, but that our rights are continuously being fought for. And when we talk about reproductive freedom, when we talk about interracial marriage, the case of loving, that these things are not obscure, far away, but they're also here at home. And so in the celebration and commemoration of service, of commitment, let us be reminded about what Paul's commitment was to our community. And that as we gather here, that when we leave today, and remembering and we're reflecting on the beauty of Paul's commitment, that we continue his legacy of service as well. That we too realize that we can emulate that commitment and doing what we can to contribute back to our society. And finally, Paul would also acknowledge this key point as well. Every vote counts. And in that good public spirit of service, be sure to register to vote, no matter how you vote, but it is our collective civic duty. And again, to Paul's family, thank you very much for allowing us in our region to be that much more beautifully represented because of his service. Your legacy continues. Thank you very much.
How you guys doing okay? Okay. I know that Robert said that Asians don't act like they're cold, but that's another stereotype. We're stoic. So talking about the kinds of things that make things beautiful, I like to call Steve Nakano. Steve, where are you? Okay, we're going to be blessed with some of the talents of the Steve Nakano Jazz Quintet. And while you get started, Steve, would you introduce your quintet? But Steve is not only a musician, he's an attorney. And the way, you gonna talk about Paul for a second? Yeah. Okay, then I will say, well, Paul brought you to me because he got his ass kicked out of Sacramento because he was talking too much. And he was standing up for the right thing to do. So, Steve, come on up.
Thank you very much. I should have written down notes to speak, but I got to tell you how busy we've been just trying to put this together. And then it was only yesterday, blue skies, not a cloud in the sky, and we looked at our phones and it said 90% chance of rain. Well, I think it went up to 100. And it's got to be Paul's sense of humor. Now, I wanted to start off by saying this. Paul was my lifetime mentor, and I met him in the spring of 1972. I was elected student body president at the end of my junior year, and Paul was the assistant superintendent. Paul wrote letters of recommendation for me to go to Cal. He wrote letters of recommendation for me to go to law school. He wrote letters of recommendation for my first job in Sacramento. Then when I came home, after getting a taste of politics, he said, okay, welcome home, get a job, you have to join the board of AACI. We need you to be active with San Jose Taiko. And so he has been my lifetime mentor. And as I was approaching this day, I was thinking, who could love him more than us? And then, just a few weeks ago, Mark and his wife invited us to their home. They love Paul as much as we do, and he loved them, I think, even more. Thank you so much. You know, it's amazing to me. It's amazing to me that we hadn't met over the years. In 1996, Paul called me, and he used to call me on my birthday. How many people would he call on their birthdays? Yeah. He would call me on my birthday, and then one day he called me, and it wasn't my birthday. I go, hey, Paul, what's up? And he says, and this was in 1996. He says, Steve, I've got Parkinson's, and I've been going to the Parkinson's Institute for 3 years. And they tell me that I have 1 year to live. And we said, oh, Paul, you need to come over to our house. We think your shoyu levels are too low. And so we made teriyaki salmon, and he says, what's the massage table for? We said, well, we just got certified in Reiki. And I was thinking, I have to break this to him slowly because he's an educator and he's a scientist, right? And so I said, why don't you get on the table and we'll try to do some Reiki. So we did Reiki every Monday for several months, and then after, and he was working at the nursery then. and we could feel his back. He would be face down first, and then we turn him over. He'd fall asleep. He'd say he didn't fall asleep. But then I started doing some really deep tissue massage, and his hand would go like this on the table. And at the end of each deep breath, his hand would relax. And then he called me, and he said, my tremor went away. And he was amazed. And then he called me that Friday and he said, my tremor came back, but it's weaker. But what he did is went and got certified in Reiki. And I know he then sought out some Reiki practitioners, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting their names. He outlived that diagnosis from 1996 to 2023. That is the will of Paul. I just wanted to tell you that he was open to so many different things. Now, I was asked to play music, and Vickie said, play that thing that you played some time ago. So I'm going to play a thing that started off as an improvisation. It's now kind of become a regular thing that I do. I'm just going to step down in front here and do it here.
your words as well as your music. You know, years ago, I grew up, I played the saxophone when I was younger, and years ago, I saw Steve, and I told him that I played the saxophone. He goes, oh, okay. And then I watched Steve play with his quintet, and I came up to him later and I said, forget what I said, I can't play the saxophone. And we want to leave it some time open for remembrances for anybody who would like to come up and say anything. No? Okay. We're going to move on. Oh, I'm sorry, Paul Fong is here too. Oh, for the remembrances.
Our next speaker is from the San Jose Asian American Studies Department. She's the coordinator, tenured faculty, and her claim to fame is that she is the executive director of putting the Oral History Project together. She interviewed 33 Asian American leaders, including Paul Sakamoto, and without further ado, Yvonne Kwan, Dr. Yvonne Kwan.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for putting up with, you know, all the water over here. We're trying our best to make sure the tents don't collapse. All right, so I had the pleasure and honor of meeting and learning about Paul through the AAPI Perspectives, Activism, and Oral History Project that Paul Fong just mentioned. And last April, the Asian American Studies program at San Jose State established a Community Change Award that was named in Paul Sakamoto's honor. It was my sincerest pleasure to give that first award to the San Jose State student activists who fought for and established a vision of liberation and education through ethnic studies. Paul was there in 68, 69, pushing to not only diversify the curriculum, but also the student population, creating pathways for college access for all underrepresented students, including Black, Brown, and Asian American students. And at that event, I have a good story to tell. I promise it's short. So it's actually a little apropos because we're running behind schedule a little bit. But we had a public recognitions portion of the event, and everyone was using a bit more time than we expected. And under Paul's breath, he wryly and quietly said, "Is this the participation trophy time of the event?" And that was Paul and his humor. So, to continue to honor Paul's legacy and life's work, we have established a memorial scholarship in his name. Scholarships will be for Asian American Studies students, which after a 55-year struggle, we finally have incoming majors this fall. And many of whom helped volunteer today as well. So from the on the bottom right of your program, you'll find a QR code and a link there. Please check out some of the oral history excerpts that we conducted and also information about his memorial scholarship. So may we continue to be guided by Paul's light and guidance and of course humor to fight against the continued injustices and the violences that persist in our world, but also find joy, hope, and beauty amongst our community as well. Thank you so much.
Members will be from a San Jose State University Delta Epsilon brother, John Freitas.
I was doing the same in high school in Oakland. We both headed for San Jose State, and as it turned out, we both wanted to be science majors. So we registered in the gym in the days when you didn't have a computer. You'd go through the gym step to step and sign up your classes that way. But it turned out that Paul and I and Mark's father, Alex Stepovich, were all very good friends by the time we were through with our classes at San Jose State. We went through there for 4 years, and at that time I left for Korea and Alex left for, where did he go? He went to Guam. And Paul stayed to do graduate work. So I just wanted to mention a few things about my experience with Paul and all the time we spent together. We traveled a lot. In fact, I wrote down just a few here. With Paul, my wife and I went to Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the Philippines, Hawaii, and many other places. So he really loved to travel, and we loved to travel with him. But as it turned out, Paul always came to our house at Christmas time dressed as Santa Claus. And for 4 years, my young daughter thought Santa Claus was Japanese. But it was a kick to watch him with her and her with him. As the years went by, I've laid out some things here that you don't need to know. I'll just say that all the time that I've known Paul all those years, 83 years, we've always been very close. My daughter remembers him well, and I guess I don't really want to say much more. He's a great guy. I love him. I saw Mark when he was 3 days old. And thank you for having me here. As far as the fraternity is concerned, I also wanted to say that I was a member of Delta Upsilon fraternity at San Jose State, and we inducted Paul into the fraternity, and he was the first Asian American in the United States that was ever taken into any of the fraternities around the campuses of the United States. Paul was number one. We always considered him to be our Jackie Robinson. Anyway, thank you for having me here.
To the fact that John and Alex, Mark's dad, was with Paul and helped him to become the very first non-white first Japanese American to be in a fraternity. And let's just call it, in those days, there was a white-only phrase in a lot of these Greek societies. And those two guys had the guts and courage to stand up for Paul. And they fought for him because they knew him, they understood him, they loved him, and they were fraternal with Paul. And they started to break the hold on the white-only phrase in a lot of the institutions at San Jose State. And thus, we know now where it started, why it started, and who did it. And so, to you, we owe a lot of gratitude and thanks, John, Alex, and your dad. So let's give them a round of applause, because no one gets anywhere without the help of other folks. And they weren't Asians, but they were brothers at heart and soul. And talking about soul, we have our next speaker, who, with his partners, life partner, had developed a soul that is particularly Asian American, and that's the music of Taiko. And I'd like to bring up Roy Hirabayashi up here to make some comments. Roy?
You know, it's an incredible honor to be asked to share stories, and it's so hard to follow all the great speakers, all the stories that have been told already so far. I think we all have our, how we've known Paul or how we first met him in different ways. I just wanted to just bring up a few things. You know, when I was reading through his bio and his background, you know, I discovered that he was the youngest of 11 children. And so that fact to me really kind of told me why he was such a fighter and understood how to really stand up for himself. You know, I'm a middle child of 5 kids, and so him being the youngest of 11, I don't know how he did that. But anyways, now to me it was his persistence, his way of really dealing with people and understanding how to really get things done and be being able to connect with different people. I first met Paul, it was my early days of going to San Jose State. I got to San Jose State in 1969, and that was at a time when there was a lot of things protesting, and the students were just doing a lot of different things on campus. It was the start of ethnic studies. We started Asian American Studies in 1970, And then just different things are just going on. And I just kind of jumped into all that whole scene too. One of my early roommates at the time was Steve Takakua, who was really involved with student government at San Jose State. And I believe Steve probably met Paul first and then introduced me to Paul, because Paul was the Associate Dean of Student Services. And so we began just talking to Paul. We discovered, when I first heard about Paul, it was Dr. Paul Sakamoto, actually. To me, growing up, the only doctors I knew, Japanese doctors, were medical doctors, like my dentist and my physician, basically. So having met an educator with the title of doctor was just amazing to me. And to know that he was in the upper administration of San Jose State at that time, Associate Dean of Student Services, was just incredible. And just the fact that I just didn't understand how sort of that could happen when we were struggling so hard just to have Asian American Studies classes on campus. So we tried to connect with Paul and to try to bring him into what we're doing. And he was very, very helpful. Paul was the kind of person, as we all know, that was really in the background of things. He never really you knew he was there just to help you. He didn't have to stand in front of what was going on, because it was him in the background that made things really happen. And one of the things he helped us do through Asian American Studies is I discovered that there were a lot of Asian American students, even though there was a lot of Asians on campus, there were a lot of Asian American students that really needed help to get into college. And there was no EOP or an Educational Opportunity Program opportunities for them to do that. And so we approached Paul and asked him, how can we help bring other students into campus? And so he suggested, well, why don't we do it through Asian American Studies? You guys, you go out, recruit, you bring in students. And so I asked him, well, how do we get slots to do that? Because at that time there was a black and brown EOP, it was all segregated programs. And so he said, well, you need to create your own program, and I'll help you do that. Well, what he did was, I told him, well, we can't take away student slots from the black and brown EOP programs, because that would not be really a great thing to do for us at that time. So he says, well, let's take it from the other program that does have slots, and you can fight with them. And that was the athletic department, basically. And so that's what he did. He took away slots from the athletic department, gave it to Asian American Studies, and we were able to recruit in Asian American students in that way. So it's an amazing way how he was able to negotiate that and be able to pull that off for us. And again, within his background of doing different things. On top of that, he was able to bring in an Asian American counselor to help support those students. He gave us work-study monies to bring in tutorial staff in order to support the students in different ways. And so he was just doing all these different things that no one knew about, and he was giving us access to and things that we never had before. And it was just his way of supporting us. Now, I feel that he was an example of what could be achieved by understanding how to work the system, and he really understood that very well. He also understood the power of negotiation and what it was needed to be successful. Today, as we all know, we're hearing in the news, many campuses, students are now protesting again for many different reasons. And there's just so much that's going on. And it just reminds me to what I experienced when I first entered college in 1969 at San Jose State, with the anti-war movement going on and everything like that. I just feel that if Paul were here today, and if he was involved in one of those campuses, he would be able to keep peace while allowing the students and voices to be all heard, and really to make some outcomes that would be very positive for everybody. So we all love Paul. Thank you very much.
Welcome, a former Sunnyvale High School Jet, and someone who Paul Sakamoto had a very close relationship with, and like I said before, one of my big heroes when I was growing up. Please welcome David Blasquez.
I didn't expect to be up here any time today, but I'm glad I am, because Paul Sakamoto meant the world to me. And I listened to all these stories that people are talking about. I met Paul when I was 15 years old. He was the principal at Sunnyvale High School, and I had transferred from one rival school back to Sunnyvale High School. And he made me sit out in front of his office for probably 30 minutes, sweating. What was this man going to tell me? And he was very kind and very supportive of me, only to find out that as I went through my 4 years at Sunnyvale, he had a tendency to, he always wanted to know all of the students at the high school. And he also had a tendency to never bring a lunch of his own. He always would grab something out of one of our bags to nourish himself as the school year went on. And Paul didn't stop there with me. When I went to San Jose State, we used to have lunch at least once a month, if not twice a month. And as I graduated from San Jose State, he encouraged me to apply to Stanford and get a master's degree in education there. And I thought, there's no way I'm getting into Stanford. But I applied, and through his persistence, I applied, did everything I needed to do, and God forbid, one day I got a letter of acceptance, and I thought to myself, this has got to be Paul. This has got to be Paul. And when I listen to your stories, I hear everything about what we struggle to do with today in our community, and that is to be a community. And Paul has that spirit about him that he has deposited in each one of us, and that is to be a good community member. Be someone who's going to help other people realize their dreams, enhance their lives, not for their benefit, but for all of our benefits. And it's for that reason that I now live in Southern California, and last year I heard from Robert that Paul wasn't doing well. And I thought to myself, you know, if there's anything I can do to make sure that I go there and tell him how much he meant to me before he passed away, that I wanted to do it. And I saw him, and I walked into the room, and I was shocked, but I walked into the room and he asked who I was, and I told him, and he said to me, "Oh yeah, you're that little basketball player from high school, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, Paul, that's me." And I wanted to tell him, and I did tell him, that he changed the course of my life. He changed not only my life, but my daughter's lives and my grandchildren now. Because it was him that encouraged me and moved me to get into something that I had no idea I could do. And for that, I'm glad I'm here to tell you how much I love and how much you love Paul Sakamoto. Thank you.
Thank Dave for doing that. He really wasn't playing it, but I really did feel like he had a great story to tell when it came to Paul Sakamoto.
I just wanted to ask, those who are remaining, how many of you were teachers with Paul? I know there was quite a few. Yeah. So thank you for being here. And through the teachers that worked with Paul, many lives were touched, as we were touched by Paul's presence. And I think it's been said often enough today that Paul was very quiet behind what appeared behind the scenes, but he was very influential in making things happen. Everything from breaking down the grip of the Greek society over San Jose State, and quite frankly, it was started at San Jose State, and then it went throughout the country in removing the white-only clauses and the charters for these sororities and fraternities. So a great debt of thanks to John and Alex on behalf of Paul. And so I think the story around Paul would be, it comes together for me because every time I went to see Paul, made my way through his Eichler home, through the that atrium where it was a jungle, and then you get past that through a sliding door, then you get into his home, and then you go to the back, and there's a forest of Japanese maple. And I said, this is great. And he says, God couldn't do any better. And he said that often in a different, not to be sacrilegious. I think he just understood how things should come together. And later on, I'll be asking later on for Mark to come up to make his closing remarks, and hopefully he'll be able to share some more insights from him. But every time I went to see Paul, he would always mention, I gotta go, Mike, because I have to see my godson. And I never asked him who his godson was, but I was just grateful that he had a godson. And it was always important for him to be able to be on time or be with him. So finally, the last couple of weeks, I got to meet Mark, his godson, and finally realized that all the things that Paul got involved with, all the people that he's affected, all this time he had a vision of where he was going to go in 25 years. And Mark told me that Paul had picked out a place on his property where, and you have to see this place, but it's a large rock with a live oak tree coming out underneath it and growing, and he said, that's where I want to be. And Mark told me that he said that 25 years ago. I thought that was something that was more recent. So Paul really had a vision of who he was, where he was going. And as an educator and as a person that had affected people's lives by just one or two comments or one or two actions, he's done that a lot with a lot of people here today. And for me, I would not have become a bona fide teacher without Paul's intervention, unbeknownst to me. I first met Paul Sakamoto when I was running the EOP, for the Latinos, because we started the Mexican-American EOP program, and we were going out recruiting. So I went to to Sanville High School because I heard that there was a Japanese American principal there. And out of curiosity and out of the hope that I could get help from him to help recruit youngsters from high school to be able to go on to college, I went to visit him, and he graciously gave us time. So as I drove up to Sunnyvale High School, parked the car, I saw this British Racing Green XKE Jaguar parked right next to this large window. And through the window, I could see a gentleman in there, well appointed in this dress. It was Paul Sakamoto. And so when I was able to enter his office and meet with him, I asked him, whose car is that? He says, it's mine. Nice, huh? And I said, you got an XKE and you're single. He says, wow. A single dude that looked that good with what we call today a chick car, you know? And so, but it was another expression of how good of a taste that he had in things that he enjoyed. And because he's a horticulturist and a guy that likes plants, I guess it's no mistake that this car was green. But I got to know him then, and then he found out that I was going to be wanted to be a teacher, and I got to teach summer school at Sunnyvale High School, my first real experience of teaching. And in that class, I had Robert Handa there, and I told you that before. and he destroyed the stereotype of a model Asian American student. He wasn't quiet, he was outspoken. He and his brother got me into trouble with the principal because they made cartoons of the principal and made fun of him. They thought it was my fault, but it's really his teacher's fault that was in journalism. But I got my job at Centerville High School, and I found out that Paul was responsible for it. And the way I found out was I had to go to an interview, and in this room, narrow, long room, with about 40 administrators in there, all men, we're interviewing folks. And I walked in there and I felt intimidated, and I thought, what the hell? I'm just going to tell them what I think and answer and let chips fall where they may. And then after the interview, I got up to walk out, and this gentleman from the way back came running towards me, tripped over a wire, fell on his face, got up and came up and says, "You're hired at Centerville High School." I said, "Really?" He said, I said, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Bob Ferrer. I'm the vice principal at the time." And then I said, "That's great, thank you." He says, No, you don't understand. Before Paul Sakamoto left for his PhD program, he told me, "Damn it, you hired that kid." So I'm not sure it was merit or anything else, but well, Paul saw something. And so like folks said before, Paul would always leave you the impression that you should not embarrass him. And so that really put the big burden on me to become the best that I could. And so at Centerville High School, everything I did in politics I learned in education and the folks that I worked with at Centerville High. And so I just wanted to let you know that things don't happen by accident, and we all learn from those who come before us, and Paul was one of my mentors. And talk about mentors, his favorite friend in school was his guy that worked with him as a counselor, and later on became superintendent of Milpitas Unified. That was Pete Mesa. And I don't know if Terry's still here or not, but Pete Mesa and Paul Sakamoto were the two mentors for me to teach me how to be an educator, a true educator. Thank you.
I was not shy, but I wasn't stupid either. So. Anyway, well, you mentioned how important mentorship was to Paul. And so we're asking him to take off his co-MC hat and do a little speaking himself about not only his relationship with Paul Sakamoto, but also the importance of mentorship. Please welcome back Paul Fong.
Thank you. And Mike Handa hit it right on the head. Nothing happens by accident. And Paul Sakamoto also hired Mike Handa to teach biology at Sunnyvale High School my sophomore year. And Mike Handa became my second role model and mentor. And so both members have been with me for my entire life. Paul Sakamoto's mentoring continued when Paul was one of the 3 founding members of AACI. He was the brains of founding AACI. He's one of the 3 members. And before incorporating as a nonprofit in 1973, during the year 1972, Paul Sakamoto would welcome me to attend the 3 brain sessions in formulating the purpose of AACI. So I had to watch these guys think about conceptualizing how AACI would be forever. And so I know the purpose of AACI very well because I attended those brain sessions that Paul Sakamoto invited me to. And you know, I was only 19 or 20 years old at that time. I said, wow, what do you want me to sit on this meeting for? And I remember everything that happened in those meetings, and everything that AACI is addressing right now happened in those 3 brain sessions that they were conceptualizing Asian Americans for community involvement with. And so he had a purpose. He had a purpose of mentoring me, and he had a purpose. He saw a vision that I would continue on with the mission of Asian Americans for community involvement, which I have been, in much larger sense than that too, in the whole community. And then when Paul Sakamoto's advocacy continued as he founded the Asian American Educators Association in the early 80s, I was a member of the Asian American Educators Association to continue with Paul Sakamoto's mentoring and mentorship. So by Paul Sakamoto mentoring me, he taught me how to mentor others, which I will be introducing some of my mentees who are now mentoring others too. So this legacy continues, this pipeline continues, and it started with Paul Sakamoto. And Paul Sakamoto started the Asian American Leaders Mentoring Movement by just being himself. Okay, I have the first mentee that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Michael Chang. He can't be here, but he sent this arrangement to civil rights pioneer Dr. Paul Sakamoto. Respectfully, your mentee, Dr. Michael Chang. Michael Chang's with 300 community college students at a student leadership conference as I speak right now. So he's keeping up with the legacy of Paul Sakamoto in a different agenda, a different environment, but it's happening all around us. It's not just right here, it's happening out there too. And so his mentorship has grown to such a point that it is very large. And the first person I was going to introduce you to talk about his mentorship was Evan Low, but he used his prerogative to come up early, so he's already spoken. And the second person is Otto Lee. Otto Lee is County Board of Supervisor. He's been mentored by many of the Asian American leaders that were mentored by Paul Sakamoto, and he's a product of Paul Sakamoto. Otto Lee, Supervisor Otto Lee.
My name is Otto Lee. Truly honored to be here speaking and see so many friendly and familiar faces here today on this so important remembrance of such a hero for our community. And of course, we always love the music of Steve over there playing. And when we start playing that music, it actually gave me a little PTSD since I do fly United a lot, and that reminds me of all the flight delays I put up with when I hear that music. But seriously, yeah, wow. You know, I just want to go back to a little story I had. I came from Hong Kong, I'm an immigrant, and went to school, studied at Berkeley, and then got my law degree from, back then they called Hastings, now it's UC Law, San Francisco. And then I actually applied and got onto the Studies-Yvonne Planning Commission back in 1997. And then I met Paul Fong. And I was saying, oh, how'd you get in the Planning Commission? So, well, that was actually fairly easy. I found my application, a few openings, so and I just got on, you know, and I got appointed by the City Council. And Paul looked at me and said, Otto, do you have any idea how many people ahead of you has put this trail in front to blaze this trail for you to have the opportunity to be where you are as the first Asian American appointed to the Planning Commission? And I looked at him, I was like, huh, what are you talking about? And I hate to say it because so many individuals these days today still think that they are so good, they study so hard, and therefore they got to where they are because of basically through their own merits. And it took me a little while after talking with Paul to truly understand the significance of how many people ahead of us have done that hard work so many, not years, but even decades prior. Right? The story of the internment of the Japanese citizens in this country, right? All the way to where we are now. There are all these stories of Chinatown being burned in San Jose. These are still stories that we're learning every day. And that's why it's so important to be able to tell that story and explain to our next generations that you might be getting A's, you might be getting all these great, you know, SAT scores, but it's not just that what it takes to get you to the next step in where we are today. And I think this is what the trailblazing and this mentorship is so important because of the fact that without Paul, and mentoring me into running for office and all that, I wouldn't be here. Going to city council and then eventually to the board of supervisors. It took me 2 tries. Right? I tried in 2008, came in second after Dave. We became good friends. Dave Cortese, now he's a senator, and I succeeded him on the board of supervisors. I'm actually the 3rd supervisor on the board. The first supervisor on the board is actually sitting right here, Mike Handa. Now he's a trailblazer on the board of supervisors, right? And then I'm now the 3rd. And it's sad to say, I talked to some folks in Los Angeles County. I said, who's the next Asian representative that will be on the LA County Supervisor? Most people look at me and just say, right now, none. I don't see anybody from the Asian community. In LA County, come on, how many Asians are living in LA County? And it just shows you how important this work is still. We're still way behind in so many ways that we still need to work on getting this work done. And I just want to also mention, for me, then, who have I've also mentored a few others. I certainly don't do as good a job as Michael Chang, doing a great job with Poly, but say, for example, Alex Lee, who is now serving as Assembly member, is somebody who I have mentored, and he's doing great work in the Assembly. I see Betty Duong out there. We've spoken many times, and I do see her, one of my mentee as well, and her sisters, we call BFF, Kathy, right? And so it's this type of work that we do. We continually, one generation after another, and that's so important. And my daughter Modest wants to go to Davis right now, and she's going to be active and wants to join the military. I'm a Navy veteran, 28 years retired, and now she wants to be a Navy ROTC and serve our country. And this is the type of work, what mentorship and mentoring, and I think it's so important to make sure. I want to tell the story of how much more what Paul has done. And just a side note, I was just talking earlier regarding the San Jose project of this oral history. When I first got into office as a county, I was approached by the great, awesome group and said, hey, Otto, we really need the funding to fund this project and make it happen. So we were able to scrounge up some funds. Not like this year, we have $250 million deficit, so this year's event, you have to ask us. But 3 years ago, that was a good time. We were able to find $500,000 for our board to fund this project. And it's amazing how many people we've been able to interview through that project, including Paul in this project. So I'm so honored to see how the circle is coming and how we can continue this great work. And I just want to say it's truly an honor to be here to speak with you today. And we need to continue this great work that Paul has started with so many more young people to come in many, many years. Thank you so much for having me.
The next person I'd like to introduce, because I met this person the same time I met Evan Low at De Anza College. And this person is Betty Duong. She is wonderful. Actually, Evan worked for me in my office as a state assembly member before he got elected to the state assembly. But I like Betty a lot better because she operates behind the scenes. She operates behind the scenes as well. And that's the way I operate. And so I always like Betty better than Evan. Just to tell you the truth. I like them both, but I like Betty better. And so, Betty Duong, can you come up and talk a little bit about your experience? She's going to be our next supervisor. She's leading by 3 points. She's beating an incumbent that's run 3 or 4 times, and she's leading by three or four points right now.
Oh, thank you, Paul, for liking me better. Hi, everybody. My name is Betty Duong, and this morning, where I was before coming here was the Asian American Youth Leadership Conference that Dr. Michael Chang and his colleagues are leading right now. Mentees of Paul leading those efforts this morning with about 300, I think there was more than 300 community college students from 30 different community colleges. And I was there this morning because, really because I was at De Anza 20 years ago. It's been 20 years. And when I got there, I met the mentors and received the mentorship that would change my life. And I ended up majoring in Asian American Studies. And I wanted to speak a little bit about that and to Paul's legacy, that because of Asian American Studies, I was able to have some shape and order to the world that I thought was my chaos up until that point. So I'm from Eastside San Jose. I live down the street now, but that's where I grew up. And I was born to a family of refugees who came out of the Vietnam War. And so growing up, I spent a lot of my time translating for my parents and always wondering why we were always poor, why couldn't we speak more English, why did I never have the words, why could I never fix the situations we were in. So after high school, I tried cosmetology school and failed. So I ended up at De Anza. And at De Anza because honestly, people were like, well, how'd you end up at De Anza? Because the guy I had a crush on ended up going there, so I might as well. And then about, I think halfway into my second year, I was looking through the course catalog. By then I really had no direction, just chilling. And I saw this course listed as a contemporary Asian American issues. So I thought to myself, I'm a contemporary Asian American, and I'm sure I have issues. So I took the course, and that's where I met Dr. Michael Chang. I was introduced to Paul Fong. I met Mike Handa. And like I said, for the first time in my life, some type of structure, shape, and order was given to this chaos, right? Like reason was provided. Not all explanations were given, but what I was given at that time was the sense of empowerment. Like you've inherited a community, Betty. You know, you may have came from Vietnam, your parents may have immigrated as refugees in the late 70s, but there's been a movement, an Asian American movement in the community that has prepared for you to be able to travel your course and be able to reach your heights. So Paul Sakamoto's legacy lives on. It reached into the depths of East Side, into Vietnamese refugee families. It reached into the lives of kids wandering through community college trying to find a direction. So when I think about Paul's legacy, I think of the saying, you know, the mission of planting trees under whose shade we will never sit. I get to sit under the shade of the trees that Paul has planted. The 300 students at San Jose City College this morning is basking in the shade that Paul has planted. So I thank the family for sharing him with us, for allowing him to also be a father to the rest of us, to give us that shade, to give us that strength, and give us that energy. I'm going to track back a little bit further too, that I work at the county now, and it was only through working at the county that I learned that there's a reason why Vietnamese American refugees arrived here in the late 70s. I'm going to start crying, y'all. In the late 70s, when the rest of the world did not want us, Santa Clara County was one of 3 congressionally designated refugee resettlement sites because of you all. At that time, along with the anti-war movement, you lobbied the county of Santa Clara to receive us, the unwanted. So that's why I get to be here today and to stand before you. So thank you again, really, to the family for allowing this space for us today and for an opportunity for some East Side kids to do a little bit better. Thank you.
Now I know why I like her. She brings tears to my eyes. Also, is Ellen Kamei here? She was here earlier, but she had to leave. She represents Rosemary Kamei, her mom, and Ellen Kamei. They're both influenced by Paul Sakamoto, and they were here to attend to show their support for Paul Sakamoto as well. The last mentee I'd like to introduce is recently the Associated Student Body President of San Jose State University. But not only was she the president, she had the authority, she used that authority for doing what is right by advocating the apology from San Jose State University for operating as an internment center, a processing center for Japanese Americans. And the college apologized for it, and it's on record, and it was all due to Nina Chuang. Nina Chuang. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Just processing Betty's words. It's kind of nervous to stand in this space. Everyone has spoken, has done great legacies, and I feel like I'm just a little seed being watered right now. Betty, what you said about us being able to bask, and I wasn't even crying before, but now I'm like processing everything. what you said about basking in the people who've come before us, and people who are here in their work and their struggle and their lifelong commitment for us as a community to thrive is so inspiring. And I was able to meet Paul through an audio recording. I served as a student research intern while serving as student body president for the AAPI Oral History Project. And I was able to listen. I had the privilege of being able to listen to Paul's story and his experiences that future children in K-12 schools will be able to access, and you all can access through the AAPI Perspectives Project. I was able to meet him in person at the Asian American Studies reunion, and I remember in the beginning of our reunion we had a bunch of students who came and did a line dance in front, and I got to stand behind Paul while he watched the students perform. I remember thinking to myself, wow, Paul doesn't even know I'm standing behind him, and I just listened to all these oral transcripts, and I just thought, I remember thinking to myself, what a giant, what a privilege to watch Paul Sakamoto, watch the fruits of his labor perform and express their culture in a space where his community was processed before they were sent to camp. What a privilege to see a giant and to see students thrive and to be proud of their Asian American identity and to live it out. And you know, I remember in the transcripts as a student listening to his story and his friendship with the DU brothers. And it was something that really hit home for me as a student body president, having colleagues and peers who were in Greek organizations that are also people of color. And hearing how students came together to advocate for their friend to join a Greek organization, and now that San Jose State has such a thriving, diverse Greek organization, it's because of Paul and many of you. And it's just so it's just an honor to continue to be mentored by all of his friends, and this little seed continues to be rained on by the love and support, and empowerment, and it's being able to work on the mural project and working and doing this together. In our resolution, we have a whereas clause that documents Paul and his impact not only at San Jose State but also on the nation. And this little seed is so this little seed is just so inspired by you all, and the fact that you all put this together. And sorry, I lost everything that was just said. But anyways, cutting to the chase, I learned from meeting Paul through these transcripts and through this oral history, and also meeting him in person, how important it is for us to continue to tell our story and storytelling, and how meaningful it is for us to hear our histories here. And I hope that we continue to share our stories, to share our memories of Paul and with each other, because these little seeds will continue to sprout because of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we're going to have an open mic session. Make sure you ask the audience members to raise their hand if they'd like to speak. So raise your hand if you'd like to speak. Thank you.
This is probably going to be 3 or 4 minutes. I'm Bryan Shaner, class of '64, Sunnyvale High School. Go Jets! That's how I first met Paul, of course. And I saw him off and on at different times in my life. I was working at Foothill College with the Disabled Students Program, and Paul was the superintendent of schools, and we were on a committee together trying to get some high school students into college, make that transition work better. But I'm going to go to the 55th reunion at Sunnyvale High School that I was at 5 years ago. And I was talking to Karen Wan, right there. And Karen and I were talking, and I mentioned to Karen I had Parkinson's disease. And she said, so does Paul Sakamoto. I didn't know that. So Paul lived about 3 or 4 miles from me. So I had a chance to visit Paul. And we talked about Parkinson's. We talked about his struggles and how well he did for so many years. And he gave me suggestions and ideas. And that became a truly special relationship. So he didn't mentor me like the rest of you. Didn't have quite that same relationship. But he really has helped me a lot to understand Parkinson's disease. And he's my role model to how to live with PD successfully. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joan MacDonald, and I served on the Catered-Kazoo Junior High School District Board from 79 to 92. And that's how I really met Paul. And I want to tell you 2 short stories that maybe some of you don't know about. One of the times that he came over to have dinner with my husband and me, we were having cracked crab. And we laughed all the way through dinner because Wally and I, my late husband and me, ate the cracked crab by getting all the crab out of all of the shells, making a big mound, and then eating it. While Paul was eating every morsel that he got out of every shell all the way through. And so we were laughing and laughing and laughing through this. And he said, "You dare invite me to another crack crab?" I said, anytime at all. Another thing I'd like to share with you, when he would sit in the audience during board meetings, he had his notebook in front of him. And there were a great many people who thought that he was taking notes, or that he had something that he wanted to say. Not true. He was doodling. And those of you who knew his doodles, they were beautiful. They were absolutely incredible. And I hope that someone has saved all those doodle notebooks and given them to a library or archives or something, because they really are special. They are really fantastic. And the other thing that I'd like to say is that one of us on the board, and I became very fond of Paul, and he became very fond of me. I told him about the loss of a childhood friend in 1942 that I had tried to find again without any luck. And this was 30 years later that I was talking about it. And this childhood friend lived a block and a half away from us, and my twin sister and I would walk down to the theater shop that the childhood friend lived in the stairs, and we would walk to school every day. And then one day, early in 42, we went down, all the windows were boarded up. No one was there. And we got to school and we said to our teacher, "This is what happened. Do you have any ideas why?" And the teacher said, "No, later we thought maybe she knew, but she wasn't going to tell us. So when my parents got home from work, and told her that Cynthia wasn't there and the windows were all boarded up, and they told us, yeah. And we were shocked and angry, and our parents were angry too. And we went to the ACLU and said, how dare you accept it? This is not the right thing for us to do. Well, ever since, periodically, I tried to find her without any luck. And I'm happy to say that 80 years later, we found her. And that was due to the persistence of my daughter, who would not give up. And she finally found, I should back up and say, we had no idea what her full given name was. We had no idea what her last name was. So trying to find her was more than a needle in a haystack. Anyway, my daughter located an archival librarian in San Francisco. This is where it was. And she did some work. And we reunited in 2021, and we are close together ever since. And I thought maybe she would come with her daughter here, but I think she's too frail to do this, especially in this weather. But that part of our history is ingrained in me forever. And no one should ever, ever, ever be sent to an internment camp. It's totally un-American. It's totally inhumane. And I am so grateful that we found her after 80 years. Thank you. And the point of telling my story is Paul encouraged me to keep trying.
Hello, I'm Dennis Marr. I'm also Sunnyvale High School class of 64, along with Karen Lon Wilson and Bryan Shaner and a few others who are here. I got to know, I can only call him Mr. Sakamoto. When I met him, he was just 25 years old, but even when we visited him shortly before his death, he was always Mr. Sakamoto, as with Miss Bloodstiker always. One of the things that I had never realized was that how comfortable he was with the students. I got to know him when he became director of student activities, and I was elected to student government. And so he would just let us sit in his office, and we would just kind of learn about life. And one day we were trying to get a decision from the administration on some issue that had to do with student government. And the principal came by, and so we asked him, and he said, well, there's something about this, so there's something about that, and left without, giving any indication about what decision should be made. And I said to Mr. Sakamoto, how did he become principal? And Mr. Sakamoto, in his droll way, said, you just saw it.
Anyone else? Any remembrance?
So someone that will be coming up and say thank you. And I know that people, I paid these guys to play. But I know that we will play until we outnumber you. But before you leave, please ring the bell at least once. It doesn't matter whether we're playing. Just take a moment, if you would, to ring the bell.
Thank you, Paul, and Steve, thank you for putting all the food together for us. He's the one that did it. As all good things, some things may have to come to an end, but it's really not an end. It's it's the beginning of another journey that we'll all be taking once we leave here. When Nina and Betty were speaking, they used the word seeds and being rained upon. Paul wrote a poem that's at Mark's home and ranch, and it's apropos just to read his poem because it's as if he heard Betty and Nina, and it's called To Grow. Paul wrote back in 2011 this poem. Seeds burst into leaves of green, branches forming its character, blossoms of rainbow colors, proof of spring. Then, fall takes its turn, recedes to be reborn, and to grow again and again and again. And so y'all are the again and agains. And so at this point, I'd like to ask Mark Stepovich to come up and give us our final words.
All right, what a day, what an event. I'm kind of blown away. I thought I was learning a lot about Paul in the last few months and kind of superseded that today. There's a lot out there about him. So anyhow, in closing for my part here, thinking I knew Paul all these years and then finding out all these other aspects and angles and things that he had done. I mean, the guy was just prolific and not a surprise, but just far more than I thought. And I wanted to kind of just mention again my own experience. Paul never demanded anything from me directly. He led by example, careful words, which motivated me to demand more of myself. And I thought it was a wonderful way to lead and encourage one another without forced guilt, stress, or drama. A true joy to help them perform for one another. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here is this cascade of opening doors and then people following through and then opening another door and moving on. Paul's an original, and if you get a minute, take a look at these little drawings here. These are just some sketches that he made individually when he moved out of his Bookson house, and that was how he wanted to identify the people that he moved. So he individually drew each one of these. He never ever reproduced any of his art. And then he wrote his address on there and he put it in an envelope and he sent it to friends. And these are just some leftovers, but that's just one example that you can just physically see that he left behind. And I think that's appropriate. Mike Handa actually, in reading that poem, after he was out at my house, he sent me a really interesting text and he said he was up at 4 in the morning, and I saved it because I thought it was interesting. And I'm just going to read his words. And he said, like nipping buds, leaves, or pruning plants, shaping them as God would have wanted is what he has done with everyone he knew and influenced. And just those little things that seemingly went unnoticed, but not really. And then I wanted to mention quickly, because you mentioned about the tree, just to give you people who haven't been out there. So roughly 25 years ago when I purchased this rough property with no road, no nothing on it, and Paul was out there, and he picked out this oak tree that's growing on a big stone on the side of a hill, so it's a natural bonsai. It has an unbelievable shape. It's probably 200 years old, and it hasn't grown much in the 25 years that I've been there. And Paul picked it out and said, "That's my tree." So we put a granite bench and some other things under there years ago, and it overlooks the little pond that's there once in a while, and it's just the perfect place. And he kept referencing that, and I thought he was kind of kidding and joking, but he was dead serious. And so that's where he's going to end up some of his ashes and things like that. And it's an unbelievable memory of him out there. And so I wanted to close with one little interesting thing. I just was cruising around YouTube, and there was some famous guy, I can't remember who he was an actor, I don't watch a lot of TV and stuff, but this host asked him, says, "What do you think happens to us when we die?" And he didn't really give an answer, he just says, I know the people who love us will miss us. So he doesn't know what happens to you when you die, but people who love you will miss you, and I think Paul's missed already. So anyway, Robert. Oh, and I wanted to thank also, but one last thing I almost forgot. This whole event, I had nothing to do with. These committee members came to me out of tremendous respect when Paul passed away and said, hey, we would like to do an event. We don't know what it is, we want to do something. So we all met at the museum, and I said, hey, I'm maxed out, I can't help you guys, but you guys knock yourself out. Paul stood up and said, I'll be chairperson. Everybody else chimed in. So this whole thing today is a tremendous effort by that committee, and I wanted to thank everybody for it. Because this turned out great. I mean, look at this weather. We still got a few survivors here. Okay, let's go.
All right, well, first of all, I want to echo the gratitude to the committee that Mark said. First of all, let's give a round of applause for all the people on the committee that organized this. It was a lot of work, and we really do appreciate what you did. What's that? Yes, that's next. That's next. We also want to thank all the volunteers who participated. We really actually could not have done it without you. And they are the folks with the lanyards. And also special thanks to Henry Nakata and Stacy Liu from J-Town Community TV. Thank you so much for everything you did. And thank you for recording this for posterity. We want to thank all of you. I'm just going to echo something that I said to some of the people who said they had to leave before we finished. And on behalf of Mike Handa and Paul Fong, you know, as much as everybody loved Paul, nobody knows everything about anybody. We all know different parts about somebody, and it takes a group like this that had all this collective experience that can talk about Paul, that gives us that complete picture and that full appreciation of the man that he was. And we could not have gotten that complete picture without all of you participating. We really do appreciate you. Thank you so much for enduring the weather, not letting anything stop you from coming here and telling your stories about Paul. I know Paul is listening. He is smirking, but I know that he is enjoying this. And we want to thank you again for taking the time to be here. And now, please, because he's paying them to be here, and we want to make sure that they get their money's worth. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again. Please welcome Steve Nakano Quintet.
partner of mine since 1987. He's going to play you something from George Benson.
I came from my shop.